Welcome to In Such Tilincuicatl. This is a podcast about poetic thinking where we share with you a different perspective of the social world. Every episode, we take a topic or a concept and we use the lens of philosophy, psychology, mythology, and art to analyze the wonderful horrors of the modern world.
In this episode, we explore the concept of the upside down, its relevance to the dream world, and the ways it is understood and represented in some examples of popular media. My name is Andrea Padilla.
And my name is Andrea Martinez, and we've been gone for a year. We took a year break, unintentionally, intentionally.
Well, I guess in a way, at least my life got a little upside down for a while. And so upside down that I am not longer geographically where I was. And you yourself made some choices, and you might not be where you are. I mean,
soon enough, yes. Soon enough.
Yeah.
But for the moment, I'm still in Dublin, Ireland. And Andrea, where are you now?
I am in Loreto, Baja California Sur, historical capital of the Californias.
There we go.
Hometown where I plan to die.
Okay. Big decision to know where one will die. I don't know yet where. Well, I mean, it's not a decision, really. But we had talked about this episode for a very long time. We have been planning the return for months, and then the months just went by and we didn't do anything. So we decided that we were going to talk about the concept of the upside down because we have both watched the Sandman. If you don't know what the Sandman is, Andreita, maybe you can tell us a bit more because I don't have a very good memory about the details.
Well, it was, I guess it started, I was reading also a book called The Dreaming in the Underworld by James Hillman, who is an archetypical psychologist. And at the same time, The Sandman boomed on Netflix. And that kind of reminded me of another very, very popular show on Netflix called Stranger Things, that we are not particular fans. I mean, I've watched the first season at least, and was interested by it. But regardless of my liking of or liking of it, the concept is there. This thing of the upside down, and then we started. Well, yeah, talking about what is this upside down. I gotta say to our viewers, listeners, that we are a little bit rusty, so we'll see how this goes. I feel we are very prepared and unprepared at the same time. So, but yeah,
I
that's
always
kind
feel
of
we are very prepared and unprepared at the same time. That's always my feeling.
this time a little bit more for me, but
Okay,
yeah,
this time a little bit less for me.
oh well, there you are. We are. It's a kind of
It's
an upside
upside
down.
So I think just to start with the Sandman and Stranger Things. So two themes emerge from both shows. One is the theme of the dream world, and the dream world in itself as an upside down that Andreita will talk more about in terms of Hillman. And the other theme that emerges is the theme of duality, right? So Western thought is very much characterized by a dual understanding of reality. If you think in terms of Plato, right? The world of forms and the world of shadows. Obviously, Christianity, heaven and hell, good and evil. And that same dualism, obviously, you can cite Descartes as well. And it's repeated in, of course, every understanding that we have of reality, and it's there in the upside down of Stranger Things. As you said, I quite dislike the show, although I've watched the whole thing because once I start, I cannot stop. But that there is that this separation, right? There's no continuum, but like there is this understanding in Stranger Things that the upside down is evil and terrible and dark, and the real world where Eleven and all her friends are fighting to save is the good place, right?
Right. Yeah, I guess that is one of the, and in our society, in our contemporary society, and kind of symbolic thought, that is the tendency to um, make emphasis on the dichotomy of things. And so this upside down, that, or this shadow part of life gets how do you say this in English? I'm also rusty in the English language now. How do you it gets reduced to only evil, for instance.
Yeah.
And in the Sandman, this kind of happens as well, but in terms of dream world, because for Gaiman there is nightmares and dreams, right? They're different things. And here is something that Hillman starts exploring, that he says dreams belong to the underworld, the psychic underworld, and this underworld is the upside down of day life. So in a way, all dreams become nightmarish, or are nightmarish. And I've been doing a little study of my own with my dreams, recalling them and what have you, and asking people like yourself and others, like, is this true? Like, have you experienced this? And the answer has most of the time been yes, because even though things are going great in the dream, something happens and that starts collapsing in some way, and it becomes this thing where you have to run from something, or you get an infestation of insects, or you are making love to your significant other, but it's not him or her or them. It's the other.
And I think, well, we come from a tradition of the interpretation of dreams that it begins, well, like in psychoanalysis, right? Begins with Freud. And so you have like texts like Dora, Case of Hysteria, where like, and I you can tell me how different that is from Hillman, but where he analyzes all her dreams, and there's always going to be a symbol of sexual desire, or like, the death drive or the sex drive, right? So they're like, reading Dora, A Case of Hysteria, it's quite entertaining, not because you actually necessarily believe that his interpretation of the dreams are correct, but because how intricate is his interpretation. Like, you wouldn't arrive so simply at understanding that the fire of the house and the box, like the box in that where she put necklace, or I can't remember what it was in, is symbolizes her vagina, for instance, right? Like, he elaborates this world, this dream world, and its meanings, that I think over the years and over the progress and evolution of psychoanalysis, it's changed how we view dreams. And as you were saying right now, like, dreams in general tend to be a little bit nightmarish. And when I was younger, I used to be freaked out because I had a very Freudian understanding of my dreams, where I'd be like, oh my God, like, because I often dream, like, my dreams, not often, but like at times they've involved incest, right? Not necessarily with my father, but like with people in my family, right? And I've woken up or completely like, freaked out by it. I really like, what does this mean? But as I've gotten older, I see that like the significance is not, like the meaning, it's not
It's not
literal.
only, or I might say, well, yeah, first of all, it's not literal, or it's, and this is what Hillman brings to the table, and I think it's very interesting. And he kind of does a synthesis of both Freud and Jung's interpretation of dreams, or ways to interpret the dream. Um, the thing with Freud, and that is why we wake up terrified when we, dream of incest. And I guess incest would be the biggest, like situation for most mortals in
Yeah.
Western society. It's because for Freud, or Freudian psychology, I would say, dreams are repressions. It's all about repressed fantasies, and the repressed. And that is what Hillman wants to kind of clean, or take aside, because it generates a lot of anguish to begin with, also, for us neurotic types. And it's not only that. For Jung, for instance, it has to do with what archetypes are at play. So you have to kind of see, if I'm dreaming of you, for instance, what kind of archetype are you representing in my play of the dream? And in that way, again, theater becomes a symbol for something. Theater in terms of play, because it's a scene that's taking place in the dream as well. And for Hillman, he kind of does. He takes those two and he puts them together, and he mixed them a little bit more with alchemy, for instance, in terms of the process of the transmutation of the substance, that the substance has to go through a lot of different processes that involve things that for our very how do you say, well, clean and moral worldview can be kind of frightening. That is the rottening, for instance, the putrefactio of the process of rotting, and this kind of thing. But this is a process from which life will spring again. And in that way, what for Hillman, the dreaming as underworld, the dream world as underworld, and as this upside down of life, that it has to do with this in very a digestive process of life. Let's kind of put it that way.
And I think maybe that's why in the Sandman, the Dream King, is it the Dream King?
Yes, the
The
Dream King.
Sorry, Tori Amos also talks about the Dream King in her songs. Do you remember?
And it's because
hanging out
because
with the Dream King. Yeah, it's because they are friends. Tori Amos is one of our favorite singers of Andrea and myself since high school. And that's why Neil Gaiman gives so much importance to the character of the Dream King. Orpheus is his name is Orpheus, no?
Morpheus.
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 No, actually, Morpheus. No, actually, just fun fact for the people that enjoy mythology here. Gaiman creates a new origin for Orpheus through
Yes, that's right.
Sandman.
Yes. Yeah.
And I find this beautiful, because for him, Orpheus is the son of Calliope, which she is most of the time the mother of Orpheus, or some of the time, and the Dream King. And I think that's just very, it's beautiful, and it's nice to see the poets out there, making their own the mythologic tradition that goes, thousands of years back. And also, fact for the ones that like the Sandman, we didn't see this character inside this season, but we might see her in the future. The Endless called Delirium. It has been said that through the relationship with Tori Amos, he has drawn many things off Tory and put them in this character called Delirium.
Really?
Uh, yeah. And for those that are very hardcore fans of this kind of thing of the 90s,
Hmm.
which is everybody right now, uh, Trent Reznor, the vocalist and of Nine Inch Nails and just general great musician and producer,
Hmm.
also it is said allegedly that Gaiman also drew from this Reznor of the 90s, of the downward spiral, 1995, this kind of thing, to represent Morpheus. And I mean, I can see the relation between them. Yes, they're both
Absolutely, because
90s blood people.
yeah, he was like a broken man, but who also wrote Hurt, right? Which is one of the most beautiful songs of the 90s, right? Broken, like kind of like badass and yet vulnerable.
Yeah, kind of like the Dream King.
Kind of like the Dream King, yeah. Um, so you mentioned the 90s. I mean, we can go back to the Upside Down later on, but because you mentioned the 90s, just thinking about Stranger Things, the popular TV Netflix series, um, and not just the 90s, but also the 80s, because I think it's also draws from the Goonies. The Goonies is from the 80s, I believe, the
Well, yeah,
TV.
like the
Yeah,
Goonies and Lost Boys
yeah.
and The Breakfast Club or what have you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So initially, the TV series was praised and criticized for this, right? For being um, a weird replica of, or a good, depending on who you asked, a good replica of that kind of atmosphere. Even the music by the Dust Brothers was very similar to the music from the time, from the 80s, late 80s. And then so there's a concept by Mark Fisher is a writer that committed suicide, a very very good writer, and he talks about the concept of hauntology. And I think hauntology and Upside Down are related. So he says hauntology is these kind of places or music or media that is trying to replicate the feeling of the 80s or the 90s, or a previous time. Um,
The
so for
nostalgia, yeah, like
the nostalgia, right, for the past. So what he explains is that, for example, electronic music, when it began, it was meant to sound futuristic, but at a certain point between 90s and 2000s, it stopped sounding futuristic. It stopped changing. And basically, he says that part of the sentiment is also that we have lost our future. So we long for the past. The future that we were promised by whatever, all these sci-fi movies, right? What was going to happen in 2000, you think of Blade Runner or so. It never came to fruition. Like the future that we were promised never arrived. And so he calls it a lost future. In terms, you can think about it in terms of technology, but also in terms of like the betterment of humankind. Of course, that hasn't happened, nor why would it. And so he terms this hauntology, right? So you see it in TV shows like Stranger Things, but also I was thinking about this because last night I was in a bar that is a 90s bar, right? So everything is full of references to the 90s, the candies, brands that were like big at the time. All the music from the moment they open to the moment they close is music of the 90s, and the bar was absolutely packed, right? So it's a thing. Like in the 90s we didn't have 60s bars. We didn't.
no, but we did. I'd say we did. There is this place in La Condesa in Mexico City, the
Hmm.
60s. That's
Hmm.
called 60s. Actually, I think that this is like part of the miasma in terms of original sin
Hmm.
of the 20th century. That's the century where we lost our future.
Hmm.
Because I remember like when I was 12, living here in Loreto, and wearing these dresses with like daisies and this kind of thing, like very, very sharp green and daisies, or the happy face. And my
Yeah.
mom, would say, these are all from my time.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think that, and if you also think about it, like in the 80s, we or early 90s, we have movies like Stand By Me, or The Sandlot, or yeah, these two are the ones that come to mind at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
that are set in the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
in this idyllic suburban America of the 50s, and the adventures of kids, there. So I think this is more of a trait that started in the 20th century, and or got a boost in the 20th century and is not leaving. Because there is also this phrase, I don't know how to translate it in English, but I'll just do it literally, that says, uh, all time past was better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This, it's part of this,
Yes, it's a
this
part.
idea of the
Yeah.
lost paradise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree partially, because I think there are differences between period pieces, right? Like historical period pieces, in terms of movies and television, and then there is what Mark Fisher refers to, which is our inability to conceive of a different world, or a radically different world, that is an ability that we lost. Now, of course, Mark Fisher blames capitalism for it, but basically all these movies that came out, right, like Alien, I was a huge fan of Sigourney Weaver in Alien, and all these types of films, they imagined a world that it was radically different from ours, and now we just see a lot of like repeats, right? Like a lot of the movies that come out
Well,
and
the
that are
rehashing.
they're rehash, yeah. All these big hits in
Then,
Hollywood are like, they're just remaking stuff constantly. Now it's like more inclusive, more LGBT, more politically appropriate, but there is no creation of a new thing, right? And I think that aspect of our current world is a little bit like, is related to the upside down, in that when you enter these spaces, right, such as, I mean, maybe the bar is not a great example, but like, that they long for that lost future or whatever, it feels a little bit like upside down, right? I think that would be the connection that I would establish between those two.
that is what my dad and my mom kind of have said in separate times to me, like, why are you fantasizing, not me, but you people,
Mm-hmm.
why are you constantly fantasizing with this thing, when we were all trying to leave that and make the world, something different, or whatever. I mean, if I would argue if creating something new is possible, but I do think that the complexity of things can be the addition of it, like Sandman, like Neil Gaiman making the Dream King Orpheus's father.
Mm-hmm.
But in this sense, like these new versions that just become kind of more inclusive, that's that's part of the agenda, and in a way it's great. We must, like, I am not opposed at all to the world of inclusion, but there is this obsessive thought that is kind of putting the world upside down, because we are losing, I think, kind of other points of vision that we could be making our lives richer in terms of poetics, for instance. Yes, so I'm gonna stretch a little bit more with the concept of coping, and how in psychology to be a little bit too nostalgic or too melancholic is also a trait of not being able to cope and can lead to, well, depression and this kind of stuff. What Hillman says, recovering him as well, what Hillman says is that we must face forward the whole of the cracks of the underworld and slip through them. I say cracks, I say hole, because those are symbolic images for the way to the underworld, the cave, the snake holes, just the regular cracks, which are a recurrent image of dreaming. You know, this infestation of insects, for instance, that come through a tiny hole in the wall, or just a mold in the on the ceiling, or on just on regular construction, this kind
Something
of
that
thing.
like sneaks through.
Yeah, exactly. That is the underworld content, the upside down trying to sneak in and move your psychic, your psychic world. So in that sense, what he invites us to is not to be afraid. And if we are being chased, or if we are being infested, or if we are, shown a black door, just face forward to this, which I might add, is pretty difficult to do in our times, because I mean, this recurring conquest or conquering, or the conquering, I would say, of the safe space, for instance, doesn't allow the face forward and then the coping. And I'm not saying with this that there are various things that should be looked and have been overlooked regarding violence in classrooms and in general social dynamics, and that's part of the woke agenda, that's part of what the woke agenda brings to the table, to be sensitive to these, to many other things that we weren't sensitive before. But I would say that we must be, in these terms, well, I guess I'm gonna do a massacre here and say, let's not forget Taoism in the sense of the way of the middle. And sometimes we Westerners, we forget the middle completely. So
And
I will say,
it becomes hyper protective, right? Like this wokeness that you're talking about, and also, this inability or preventing one from into the upside down or into the underworld, whatever. And I think that starts from early childhood in Western countries, right? Like where the safety of the baby is like the most like, I mean, of course the safety of the baby is important, but how safe do how safe is too safe,
yeah,
I mean, like, how in I think it's in the United States, they baby proof the apartments, right? I didn't grow up in a baby proofed house, neither did you, and I didn't break my head. I mean,
yeah, no,
it takes one
I
time
learned,
for you to hit the corner
yeah,
of a table for you to know that, okay, that hurts.
yeah, I'm
Got
not
it.
gonna do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's part of the same. Uh
Also, I'm gonna interrupt you here, because I do think that in that way the society has become a little bit upside down, whatever the upside was, which is this overdiagnosis of things, like I have anxiety, I have la 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 la. I agree. Before, like, many of us, I guess, were not diagnosed for many, from just ADHD. I It wasn't it wasn't the fashion to go to the psychiatrist, neurologist, and why is my child this hyperactive? Because it's completely um, it's reduced to moral sickness to be, to have some kind of
It
condition,
becomes
any
part of the
condition.
identity. It becomes part of the identity of the person, or as Georg, Hans Georg Moller would say, a part of the profile, right? Then you are
Our
ADHD.
friend.
A friend. But
Yeah, and
just let me finish that point, because I was actually watching Gabor Mate, who is psychotherapist on trauma. He's great. He's an excellent psychotherapist, and he has amazing son whose name is Aaron Mate, who I watch regularly in political analysis. But what he says about ADHD, I think you would enjoy that, is that the child distracts himself or herself, or learns to distract himself or herself as a coping mechanism from something in the environment that the child is not liking or is hurting him. So seeing parents, for example, argue, right? The child tries to block it out by getting distracted with something else. Or of course, if the parent is too busy or too distracted, then the child feels the need to also do something to entertain themselves, but they don't learn to stay with what they're with. It's not something, basically, Gabor Mate says, that you come with. It's a process of defense against something in the
yeah,
environment.
and that could influence the neurologic development
Mhm.
as well,
Exactly. It
because
does, but it does. Yeah.
it does, because it's this whole thing. They're both together. It's nature and nurture go together. So yeah, I would agree actually on this, that, and that's the things that we don't maybe are not paying attention to. And then what we have now is this: well, what can I put on my profile in terms of identity that include this well, everything. I think we got a little bit lost now from the upside down, but we will
Well, no, I have the connection. I have the connection to the upside down, but just because we're talking about this, and uh the disease of modern society, this is a good point to connect with Eduardo Galeano. So when we're talking about the upside down, you reminded me of this book that I read many years ago, Patas Arriba, which means basically upside down. And upside down, like, basically in all the examples that we've mentioned, is used as a representation of something that is wrong, right? And of course, we all already kind of question that, whether there's something wrong with the upside down, or whether there's something that should be avoided. And we've said, in terms of psychology, no, it shouldn't. But the way Galeano talks about it is same, with that same duality. Upside down is bad, but he does an analysis, an exploration of Latin America, or the world in general, under capitalism as well. And he says the world that we live in now is upside down, right? And so he gives examples, right? So one of the ones I just wrote a couple down, because I thought they're quite, I mean, he tries to be funny, because the fact that we live in what we think should not be the case is kind of funny, how we've ended up here, right? So he says, for example, one paramilitary group that was in 1997 in Chiapas, that were responsible for the massacre of Actel, the name was Peace and Justice, right? So it's funny, like I mean, it's a tragedy,
yeah.
but it's like what we used to say when we were
Well,
teenagers. You and I, we used to say funny fucked up.
funny fucked up. And in the end, um in terms of dramatic genres, for instance, the most realistic genre is the tragedy comedy.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
it's this mix of the two, which is what you're saying right now. So give us more examples.
So another example is he talks about Switzerland, and Switzerland has no unemployment, or like he writes the book at the end of the 90s, right? So at the time, Switzerland had no unemployment, and he goes to this meeting where people proposed to work less hours without decreasing salaries. Right, like it was proposed to work less hours without a decrease in salaries, and the Swiss voted against it. Right, so he again is like, why would you? um and then just something that he talks about it, of course in Mexico City we understand it very well, and basically any Latin American city that has the inequality that we have, which is kids grow up in gated communities, right? They very rarely have seen like the reality of most of their connationals, right? They don't go to centro histórico necessarily unless it is to go to a posh restaurant, and they often know better other cities, for example Paris or London or Brussels, than they know their own. So he says, of course he presents that as a contradiction in itself, that we're living in a world with these things somehow make sense, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and also, well, one of the other things that I will pave the way so you can finish our episode, Andreita, is this other dichotomic view of um, completely Eurocentrist that has always seen Europe as a garden and the
Mhm.
rest of the world as this jungle where they go and they well, they conquer and they make it pretty,
Mhm.
or they know what to do with it, this other thing of the knowing what to do with this jungle. And well, why don't you share with us what happened in recent months?
So Joseph Borrell last year, who is a high representative for the European Union, foreign affairs and something else, made a very unfortunate comment that got, of course, a lot of social media outrage. He said that Europe is a garden, and that they need to protect the garden from because the rest of the world. He literally word by word said the rest of the world is a little bit like a jungle, right? So I mean, it's the colonialist mindset that obviously hasn't changed, and that it's just often disguised with nicer words, but it's that's and yet ironically, right, we were talking about this before we recorded, it is in the jungle, in those jungles, where there is a closer there's a more willingness to have a closer look at the upside down, right? You said there's festivals, there's
Yeah.
carnivals. That's there's an episode in Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain. Now I'm being completely like ignorant. I don't remember the country where he's in, but it's either Southeast Asia or Latin America, and they do a 3-day the jungle, the jungle, 3-day festival where they just drink themselves in the jungle. Like actually it's in the jungle, right? It's this community, is this a particular group of people, and they just drink. And when you wake up and you drink more, and you wake up and you drink more, you pass out and you drink, and this lasts 3 or 4 days. And Anthony Bourdain films it all, and of course he's like drunk himself, and like people get sick, and that's just it. That's the whole thing.
And that the thing, and I would say again with the Hillman, it's that this the upside down and the willingness to get involved with it. It has to do with, again, another topic that we've discussed on many other episodes, which is the other or otherness. It's a path to otherness, even the other in myself, me being drunk, me dreaming.
Mm.
And I would just want to say that in terms of this Brit that said those very unfortunate comments, he falls right into the basket that Galeano is describing, because this man is a foreign affairs dude.
Yeah.
And he has no sense of diplomacy, no sense of, where to sip it. Maybe you can say that like at home to your wife and believe it, but your believies are not, the thing that makes foreign policy, man.
You believe that is what's his name? Who says believes?
Louis
Louis
C.K.
C.K.
Sorry.
No, I like miss him. Well, I think
And what? Yeah. We can say goodbye.
we can close there. So anyway, we hope to have more of you listen to us. We hope to not take another long break. We hope to come up with things that are interesting to listen to and to discuss, and that you continue to listen to us. And we're happy to be back.
Very happy.
So my name is Andrea Martinez.
My name is Andrea Padilla.
We are in Such Linguicatl.